Don't you dare do that!" The man's voice cracked through the air, sharp and cold, like the snap of a whip. But it was too late. Bradley Harlan had already pressed the button. The industrial paper shredder roared to life like a starving iron beast devouring the check worth $4.7 million in seconds. The metallic growl echoed through the marble hall of Monarch Capital Bank in downtown Chicago, where white stone reflected the crystal lights like a temple built for power and money. The room went silent. Strips of paper shot out, curling and twisting like the ashes of a dream that had just been burned. A woman covered her mouth, gasping. A man in an expensive suit gave a low whistle. And then, like a spark catching wind, dozens of phones were raised. Cameras flashed. A forest of mechanical eyes turned toward the man in a black hoodie, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers, Jordan Ellis. He stood motionless in the center of the storm. No cry, no flinch, no change in his calm expression. Only a silence so deep, it seemed even his heartbeat echoed against the walls. At his feet, the shredded pieces of the check rolled lightly across the cold marble floor, brushing against his shoe like fragments of a soul just destroyed. Brad, still trembling from adrenaline, smiled in triumph beside the shredder. "The problem is solved," he declared, his voice dry and echoing through the luxurious space. A few customers nodded in approval, satisfied as if they had just witnessed a con man being put in his place. Jordan slowly closed his eyes. For a moment, time froze. A gust of cold air swept in from the revolving doors, carrying the scent of steel, burnt paper, and something profoundly human, the stench of contempt. When he opened his eyes, his voice came out low and steady like a bronze bell striking through still air. "You have no idea what you've just done." It wasn't a threat. It was a verdict. The truth was about to unfold. 20 minutes earlier, Monarch Capital Bank had been a picture of calm prestige. The ground floor shimmered with light black granite floors, gleaming beneath ceilings, painted with old murals of commerce. It was the kind of place that made people lower their voices when they walked through, as if entering a sacred hall reserved for the elite. And in the middle of that perfect picture, Jordan Ellis, in a black hoodie and worn jeans, appeared like a blot of ink. Eyes flicked toward him, quick, sharp, cold. A man like him didn't belong in a place like this, or so those looks seemed to say. He could feel each stare like a pinprick against his skin. But he stayed quiet, because today he wasn't there to be served. He was there to observe, to test. 20 years ago, Jordan had worked the night shift at this very bank, mopping floors and cleaning windows. 20 years later, he owned 67% of it. But today he had entered through the front doors, not the executive elevator, not the private entrance reserved for the CEO. He wanted to know if, after all the policies and trainings he'd implemented, the people on the front lines still remembered what respect looked like. Behind the counter sat Emily Carter, a 26-year-old blonde teller. Her manicured nails clicked against the keyboard as she glanced at him, her eyes flat, indifferent. To her, he was probably a nobody, maybe some jobless guy, maybe a scammer trying to cash a fake check. In her world, hoodies didn't come with millions. She let him stand there. 10 seconds. 20. 30. A deliberate silence, the tiny form of power she loved to wield. When Jordan finally said, "I'd like to deposit this check," she lifted her head slowly and took the paper between two fingers as if it was something dirty. And then her gaze froze. $4,700,000. The number stunned her. For a split second, the confidence on her face cracked like paint on glass. 4,700,000. Her voice broke. Her throat went dry. All the arrogance drained away, replaced by the raw panic of someone realizing she might have made a terrible mistake. "Just a moment," she stammered. "I need to call the manager." Brad Harlan emerged from behind the frosted glass office, tall tailored grey suit, Italian shoes, polished to a mirror shine. He didn't look at Jordan like a customer, but like a problem. "He wants to deposit this," Emily said, her hand still shaking. Brad took the check, arched an eyebrow, then laughed a sharp, mocking sound. "A guy dressed like this has a $4 million check," he said loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. People turned to look curious, exactly as Brad intended. He held the check up to the light, pretending to inspect it like a detective. "Paper's real, ink's real, probably printed in someone's basement," he said coldly. "What do you do for a living, private investor?" Jordan replied calmly. Brad laughed again, brittle and cruel. "Private? What, investing in scratch-off tickets?" A few customers chuckled. Emily lowered her head. Phone hidden under the counter, secretly starting a live stream. The title flashed on screen. "Bank Fraud Happening at Work." Jordan reached into his wallet and pulled out a sleek black American Express Centurion card that gleamed under the lights. But Brad didn't even bother to look closely. His prejudice had already blinded him. "You really think you can scam me?" Brad snapped his voice, sharp and cutting. Jordan looked around. Phones were raised, cameras, flashing judgment, glowing in every lens. The loneliness pressed against his chest, but his face stayed calm. Only the faintest curve touched his lips, a whisper of a smile. "Would you like to verify it? I'll wait," he said, his tone low but unwavering. Brad's eyes flared with prideful anger. "No need. I won't let this bank be taken advantage of by someone like you." And in that surge of arrogance, he snatched the check, turned, and shoved it into the shredder in the corner. The machine screamed. Everything stopped. The check was torn into hundreds of thin white ribbons, curling and falling to the ground like snow. Jordan watched. His dark eyes hardened. Rage rose within him like a tidal wave, but he held it in no raised voice, no outburst, not even a heavy breath. In that moment, everyone thought he had lost. Only he knew the real game had just begun. 20 minutes before, that check turned into a storm of shredded paper. Jordan Ellis pushed through the heavy revolving doors of Monarch Capital Bank, carrying with him an uncanny calm. No bodyguards, no assistants, no luxury cars idling at the curb as usual. Just him, a 44-year-old man in a worn black hoodie, faded jeans and sneakers, so scuffed the logo had nearly disappeared. It wasn't the look of a billionaire bank chairman, but that was exactly the point. The glass doors sealed behind him, shutting out the noise of downtown Chicago. The horns, the screech of tires on damp asphalt, replacing it with the quiet of money, that thick, sterile silence that only exists in places of excessive wealth. The air smelled of polished wood, expensive leather, and freshly printed ink rich enough to almost touch. Jordan inhaled slowly, his eyes sweeping across the white-grey marble columns and mirrored glass so clean it reflected his own shadow. He had walked these halls hundreds of times before, but always through the VIP elevator, straight to the 30th floor where the boardroom overlooked the city skyline. Today was different. Today he entered through the front like any ordinary customer, like a man with no name, no rank, no status. From across the lobby, Emily Carter spotted him the moment he stepped inside. Her professional instinct kicked in, automatically classifying the man before her, a habit every teller here had been trained to do, though none would admit it. Faded hoodie, wrinkled jeans, old Nike shoes, no watch, no briefcase, no ring. In her head, she labeled him instantly, low-tier, no potential possible trouble. Straightening her shoulders, she tilted her chin slightly, the pale red lipstick curving into a polite, hollow smile, the kind that looked professional, but carried no warmth. Jordan noticed. He'd seen that look countless times over the last 20 years, the look of people convinced they could measure someone's worth just by appearances. He walked slowly to counter number 4, where a small silver plaque read, "Emily Carter, Senior Teller." Emily kept typing deliberately, avoiding eye contact. Jordan stood there, silent. 10 seconds. 20. 30. He counted each tick of the wall clock, big and gold, inscribed with the bank's old slogan, "Time is trust." But trust rarely came to those who looked underestimated. "Could you help me deposit this check?" His voice was calm, low but clear. Emily didn't look up. One moment she said her tone, glacial fingers pretending to type. When she finally reached out, her nude, polished nails pinched the check between 2 fingertips, as if touching something unclean. In that instant, a memory resurfaced. Years ago, when Jordan was a janitor, he had watched a middle-aged man in simple clothes get escorted out by security for sitting too long in the lobby. That night, Jordan had made himself a promise that if he ever had the power to change things, arrogance would never be part of his system. And today, he had returned, not out of anger, but to see just how far his own institution had strayed from that promise. Emily unfolded the check. Her eyes froze on the neatly written line, "Pay to the order of Jordan Ellis, $4,700,000. The air thickened. She blinked, unable to process what she saw. $4,700,000. Her throat tightened. Her certainty cracked. The world she lived in, where poor meant powerless, suddenly didn't make sense. "Please wait a moment," she stuttered, pressing the intercom button. Within 60 seconds, Bradley Harlan appeared, broad-shouldered, slick hair, perfectly tailored dark grey suit, and a gleaming Tag Heuer watch. Every step he took across the marble floor sounded like a declaration of authority. "What's going on?" Emily Brad asked, eyes flicking toward Jordan. She handed him the check, mumbling, "He wants to deposit this." Brad arched an eyebrow, glanced at the paper, then let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, the kind of laugh born from habit, not humor. "Where'd you write this, at a coffee shop?" His voice carried loud enough for nearby customers to turn their heads. A woman in a pencil skirt raised an eyebrow. A young man in a suit lifted his phone, ready to record. Jordan stayed silent. "You can verify it," he said simply. "I'll wait." "No need." Brad shot back, his tone dry. "I've seen this trick before. Small-time scam. You really think you can fool the biggest bank in the Midwest? Pathetic." Emily bit her lip, glancing nervously at Brad, but feeling a flicker of thrill inside, the kind that came from standing beside power. She discreetly started a live stream on her phone, titling it, "Craziest Bank Fraud Ever Caught at Work." Jordan opened his wallet and slid out a sleek black American Express Centurion card, metal-edged matte gleaming under the lights. A few people in the lobby recognized it instantly, their expressions shifting, but Brad didn't notice. He sneered, "Fake cards are easy to print these days." "You don't want to check the system?" Jordan asked, his tone still even. Brad leaned forward on the counter, his voice dropping low but still loud enough for the crowd. "You think I don't see what's happening here? You wearing a $10 hoodie, holding a $4 million check. Don't insult my intelligence. Get out before I call the cops." The chandelier light caught Jordan's face, revealing the strain in his jaw, the quiet pulse in his neck. Yet he stood still, not one word of protest. "You want to know who I am?" he said softly, his voice steady and deep. "Do your job. Verify it. Or do what you think is right." The words weren't a challenge, but they carried a quiet sadness, the kind that comes from someone who once believed in people's decency, but now had to test it himself. Brad inhaled sharply, his face reddening. He snatched the check from Emily's hands, his voice rising. "You want me to do what's right? Fine. I'll protect this bank from frauds like you." He turned and strode toward the industrial shredder in the corner. Emily gasped, eyes wide. He's not really going to," she whispered. Jordan watched a glint of cold light in his eyes. He didn't stop him. He didn't shout. He simply said, quietly but clearly, "Don't do it." But Brad either didn't hear or didn't care. The shredder roared to life, its blades spinning like the jaws of a beast. The check disappeared, torn to pieces in seconds. When the last fragment fluttered to the ground, Jordan closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids flashed a memory the day he'd laid the first foundation for this bank built on the ideals of trust and dignity. Now that trust had been chewed apart by the arrogance of his own employees, he opened his eyes, breathing slowly, steadily. Before him stood Brad, smiling like a victor, surrounded by a dozen raised cameras. What Jordan didn't yet know was that every one of those phones would soon broadcast the truth. In just 20 minutes, everyone in that lobby would learn exactly whose check they had destroyed. The roar of the shredder died, leaving a cavernous void in the air, the white paper ribbons still spinning in the catch tray, like thin wisps of smoke after a fire. The entire lobby froze. No one spoke, yet every gaze carried the same feeling, astonishment laced with fear. Brad Harlan stepped out from the chandelier's light chest, heaving breath unsteady. A victorious smile spread across his lips, the smile of a man convinced he had just saved the bank from a sophisticated scam. He turned, scanning the room, waiting for applause. An older man gave a slight nod. A woman in a Prada dress smirked. Most of the others simply stood silent. Phones raised, recording going live. A social media storm was forming. Jordan Ellis stood at the center, his shadow stretching across the polished black granite. The crystalline light from above caught in his eyes, so deep and steady that the room itself seemed to slow. Only a banked fury lived beneath that calm, smoldering like embers under ash. His voice came quiet but clear. "You have no idea what you have just done." Brad laughed, the sound tinged with adrenaline. "Yes, I do. I just protected this bank from a third-rate con. You should be thanking me." Jordan did not answer. He bent, picked up a tiny shred. The name Ellis still showed faintly on it. He turned it between his fingers and watched it crumble in his palm. Everything in him wanted to explode, to shout, to overturn the arrogance in front of him, but he held back. 20 years of building an empire had taught him that anger could destroy more than the blades of any shredder. He drew a slow breath and glanced at the clock, 2:45 in the afternoon. 15 minutes left. 15 minutes until everyone in this lobby and the world watching on thousands of screens would know whom they had just insulted. Emily Carter was still live streaming. She zoomed in on Brad's face, her voice shaky, yet thrilled. "We have just caught an extremely dangerous fraud. The branch chief is handling it. Watch never trust people like this." Her chat flooded with comments. "This is insane. That man looks scary. Justice must be served and then... But is this going too far?" That last line slipped into Emily's mind, but she pushed it away. She did not want to doubt her boss. Brad kept performing his hero's part. We cannot let someone impersonate an identity and bring a bogus check in here. I will call the police. People like him need a lesson. A black customer nearby shook his head. Why not verify first? He said softly. Brad snapped around with a thin smile. You want this bank to be fooled. We move hundreds of millions here every day. This is no place for blind trust. Jordan heard every word, each syllable hammered into the air, but his expression did not change. Only one small detail shifted his hands, tightened until his knuckles blanched. Outside afternoon sun filtered through thick glass onto his face, lighting the fine lines at his eyes, the marks of 2 decades of hard work and sleepless nights in sealed boardrooms under harsh white light. He had climbed from janitor to chairman, yet in other people's eyes, a hoodie could still return him to his old station, a man not to be trusted. The truth hurt, but it was not new. It was a reminder of what he had always known, that prejudice does not die, it only puts on a suit. Brad was savoring his role. He turned to Emily Call Security. I do not want this guy making trouble. Emily nodded her hand, trembling. She was starting to feel that something was off. Beside her, a customer whispered, Something is not right. Brad did not hear. He was drunk on a counterfeit righteousness. Jordan looked at him and spoke low and firm. You have the right to do what you think is right. But before you do, ask yourself, what are you protecting, the truth or your own pride? Brad froze for a beat, then scoffed. Save the philosophy. Who do you think you are to talk like that in my bank? A cold glint crossed Jordan's eyes. He answered simply, Your bank. Brad did not understand. Only a few standing near Jordan felt the shift in his tone, calm yet heavy enough to tint the air. Jordan took out his phone, pressed a few buttons and lifted it to his ear. Hello, please confirm the board meeting at 3 o'clock. Yes, I am on the ground floor. I will come up as soon as I finish here. He spoke just loudly enough for the whole lobby to hear. Brad frowned. Did you say board meeting? Jordan nodded lightly, eyes still composed. That is right. And do not worry, I will not be late. Brad laughed, trying to cover his unease. What kind of stunt is this? You think a phone call can fool me? You are going to jail. But under the bravado, a thin chill had begun to crawl up his neck. 2:55 in the afternoon. The minute hand crept towards the 3. Jordan stood straight gaze, fixed on the VIP elevators at the far end, the ones reserved for executives and major shareholders, a small bright brass plate reading Executive Access Only. He walked slowly, step by step, each footfall, sounding against the marble like a countdown. Brad shouted, Hey, what are you doing? Stop, that area is off limits. Jordan didn't stop. He drew from his wallet a smooth black card with no name and no logo, only a silver edge and a tiny chip. He raised it to the scanner. A soft tone sounded. The red light turned green. The elevator doors parted with a gentle chime. Brad went rigid. Emily's mouth fell open. The lobby fell silent, save for Brad's ragged breathing in the vast space. Jordan turned his eyes softer now, almost pitying. You asked who I am, he said, light but clear enough for every recording phone you are about to find out. He stepped into the elevator. The doors slid together. Behind him, the great clock struck exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At that exact moment, the intercom system sounded a clear, warm female voice. The board meeting of Monarch Capital Bank will now come to order. Chairman Jordan Ellis presiding. The words hit the building like a thunderclap. Brad stood rooted, face drained. Emily's phone slipped from her hand, the live stream still running. And the thousands watching that stream, the audience of a public shaming, were now witnessing a historic reversal. No one spoke. The entire lobby held its breath. Only Brad, his face, twisting between horror and humiliation, stood there like a statue. Up above, behind glass that mirrored the Chicago sky, Jordan Ellis, the man in the worn hoodie, was preparing to return to conclude the lesson he had just let them write themselves. The final chime of the intercom rolled through the space like a delivered sentence. The board meeting of Monarch Capital Bank will now come to order, Chairman Jordan Ellis presiding. The entire lobby fell into a deathly stillness. Clients from the premium tier, the tellers on the line, even the security staff near the door seemed frozen. No one dared to breathe. That announcement struck like a hammer against the arrogance that had ruled this place for years. Brad Harlan stood motionless, his face-drained lips trembling as if he could not accept the sound he had just heard. Sweat beaded at his temples, slid down his collar, and soaked into expensive fabric. From behind him, a young female employee whispered, "Chairman Watt," and Emily Carter, still holding the phone she had been using to live stream, almost dropped the device. Her screen flickered as the viewer count surged to 40,000, and comments flooded in. "Wait, he is the chairman." No way, what just happened? Emily fought to keep her phone from falling, her hands shaking hard. She looked up toward the VIP elevator, the one Jordan Ellis had stepped into less than a minute ago. The doors were closed, but the echo of his gaze remained quiet, generous, yet carrying the weight of a coming storm. A single ping sounded. The central elevator, the largest and gleaming, began to descend. The numbers on the display ticked down 30, 29, 28 each chime like a countdown. Brad spun around in panic. No, impossible. It is a joke, it has to be. He is fooling everyone. But to the others he was no longer the commanding director. He was a small man denying reality. A heartbeat later, the elevator stopped. The doors opened. A group stepped out. First Linda Park, the chief operating officer poised in deep blue Armani Thomas green. The chief financial officer, with neatly cut silver hair, and Karen Patel, general counsel, arms wrapped around a thick dossier. They emerged with grave eyes, then all turned toward the VIP elevator beside them. Ping. The second set of doors slid open. Jordan Ellis stepped out. He still wore the old hoodie, the faded jeans, the scuffed sneakers. No scepter, no tie, no entourage. Yet an effortless authority radiated from him, the way he walked, the way the crowd parted, without being told, the way Linda Thomas and Karen dipped their heads in greeting. All of it pointed to a single truth. This unadorned man held the highest power here. "Good afternoon, Chairman Ellis." Linda said, her voice low and sure. "The boardroom is ready. The quarterly reports are prepared." Jordan nodded once. "Thank you, Linda. Before we go up, there is something I need to address down here." He walked toward the center of the lobby, where Brad still stood, petrified. Each footfall landed even and heavy like a clock, beating toward the hour of judgment. Instinctively the crowd opened, forming a clear ring, an improvised court. When Jordan stopped, he stood straight, shoulders broad, his calm gaze sweeping the room. Silence took hold once more. Then he spoke, Bradley Harlan. The name cut the air clean and sharp. Brad jolted, body trembling. "Mr. Chairman, I did not know. I had no idea you were. You did not know." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "You do not need to know who I am to offer a customer basic respect. Respect must never depend on the title of the person in front of you. Have you forgotten that?" Brad opened his mouth, but his throat was dry. He searched the room for someone to save him. Even Emily, who had once looked at him with admiration, bowed her head to avoid his eyes. "What you did is unacceptable." Jordan continued, voice level. "No need to raise it. You destroyed a customer's asset worth $4.7 million. You abused your authority and humiliated a person because of how they looked. Most importantly, you betrayed the very values this bank was built on: respect and integrity." Brad stammered, "I was only trying to protect the bank. You thought Jordan cut in his eyes, turning cold, that a person in a hoodie could not be wealthy. You thought judgment was yours to hand down. That thinking did not just destroy a check, it damaged the image of this institution. The air grew so dense it swallowed sound. Only Brad's ragged breathing and the soft clicks of cameras recording the moment could be heard. Your employment is terminated effective immediately, Jordan said distinctly. From now on, you are not permitted to set foot in any branch of Monarch Capital Bank. Brad seemed to fold in on himself, knees weakening. Chairman, please, I have a family. I was following procedure. Jordan cut him off. No procedure permits the humiliation of a human being. You did not act as a doorkeeper. You acted as a self-appointed gatekeeper who believed you had the right to despise. Two security officers stepped forward, immaculate hands, empty, standing at Brad's sides awaiting instruction. Jordan gave a small nod. Please escort Mr. Harlan out. Brad turned to the crowd in desperation. Everyone, I was just doing my job. No one answered. Phones stayed raised, capturing each slow, spent step as he left under the weight of 100 eyes. When the great revolving door closed behind him, Jordan turned to Emily Carter, who still clutched her phone. The stream had ended, but tears streaked her face. Miss Carter, he said, not harsh, but with enough gravity to make her unsteady. Do you recognize what was wrong in how you behaved? Emily broke down. I did not mean to. I just thought I was only following Mr. Harlan. Jordan nodded his gaze, not angry, but sad. Sometimes worse than the person who does wrong is the one who sees it and does not stop it. I do not want to lose you. You will be the first to attend our new training on recognizing bias, on respect, on how to treat others as fully human. Emily nodded through tears. Jordan faced the lobby. Starting today, we will reform the entire Monarch Capital Bank system. Every employee from teller to vice president will complete training in respect and integrity. We cannot be entrusted with the world's money if we cannot see the person standing behind a check. His words rang out like a declaration. Heads nodded across the space, a few eyes shone. Jordan drew a breath and looked around. We can build a bank with money, but we can only keep it with human dignity. He turned toward the VIP elevators to return to the meeting, then paused. Behind him, the lobby remained hushed. A thin voice rose Emily's, choked with feeling. Thank you for not giving up on me. Jordan smiled, rare sunlight in a storm. I did not build this bank to punish. I built it to teach people how to remember being human. He turned away and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. The lobby's warm light still trembled, as if it had witnessed not only a dismissal, but an awakening. The elevator doors closed behind Jordan Ellis, but the echo of what had just happened still rippled through the air like an invisible aftershock. The grand lobby of Monarch Capital Bank remained utterly still. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone was still trying to understand how in just 30 minutes the world they knew had been completely turned upside down. The customers who had sided with Brad Harlan now lowered their heads avoiding eye contact. Others quietly slipped their phones away, embarrassed, as if caught taking part in some ritual of cruelty. The icy pride that once defined this place, the supposed temple of financial prestige, had been stripped bare, exposing a simple, painful truth. Arrogance had blinded everyone. Behind the counter, Emily Carter stood motionless. She felt the chandelier light burn against her skin, no longer golden or elegant, but harsh like an interrogation lamp. Her hands trembled as she held her phone, its dark screen reflecting her own pale face. Outside, Brad Harlan was being escorted through the revolving doors by 2 security guards. The November wind of Chicago cut through his expensive suit, whipping against his collar. Each step felt heavier than the last, his polished shoes slipping slightly against the marble floor. He tried to lift his chin, but the stares of passers-by cut into him like blades, curious, judgmental, mocking a mixture of pity and satisfaction. As the doors spun shut behind him, he caught his own reflection in the glass, a man who once thought he was the gatekeeper of truth, now just a broken figure with hollow eyes. His phone buzzed relentlessly inside his pocket. Dozens of notifications flashed messages from colleagues, his wife, the press. A headline was already spreading online. Bank branch director insults and destroys the check of his own chairman. Video hits 2 million views in 30 minutes. Brad stared at the words, his lips quivering. A faint groan escaped his throat. He knew his career had just been shredded, just like the check he had destroyed with his own hands. Downstairs, Jordan had not left the lobby yet. He stood before the elevator, back turned to the crowd, and took a deep breath. He felt no joy, no triumph, only a heavy weight in his chest, because he knew this wasn't just a lesson for Brad. It was a reckoning for the entire system. He turned around, his eyes gentle. Everyone, his voice, rang out, not loud, but deep and steady, and instantly the room fell silent. I know what just happened might have shocked you, maybe even scared you. But I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I came to fix something we've lost without realizing it. He paused, letting his gaze travel across every face. We've forgotten how to treat people like people. We judge them by their clothes, by how they speak, by what's in their bank account. And worse, we've convinced ourselves that this is what professionalism looks like. No one replied, but the air seemed to grow heavier. Emily bowed her head as tears welled up and streamed down her cheeks, smudging her mascara. Miss Carter Jordan said softly, his tone calm and free of anger. Do you know why I chose to come back to this branch for this test? She shook her head, unable to speak. Because this is where I started, he said. 20 years ago, I worked the night shift here, mopping floors and emptying trash bins. No one knew my name. But right here, a senior teller used to smile at me every night as I cleaned near her counter. She once told me, whatever you do it with self-respect, because respecting others begins with respecting yourself. I never forgot those words. His voice deepened, warm yet resonant like a bronze bell. But today I saw something different, that our system has allowed pride to replace respect. That's my failure too, not just anyone else's. Because I didn't look deeply enough to see the cracks in the culture I built. He looked around the lobby. And I promise you, from this day forward we will fix it, not with slogans, but with action. From the back of the crowd, an elderly black woman who had been watching quietly stepped forward. She wore a deep purple coat, her eyes warm and wise, carrying the calm of a lifetime. Her voice was gentle, yet strong. Thank you, son. Thank you for standing up and reminding them that dignity still exists." Jordan bowed his head slightly, a tender smile on his lips. "Thank you, Ma'am. People like you are the reason I still believe the world can change as long as one person dares to begin." In the corner, a young man in a suit, the same one who had filmed everything, typed quickly on his phone. He posted the video with a caption, "A powerful lesson on power prejudice and human dignity at Monarch Capital Bank." The video spread like wildfire. Comments poured in. "I'm crying for real. This is leadership. This belongs in business schools. Respect is not a luxury, it's the minimum." Jordan approached Emily again. He didn't look at her as a boss, looks at an employee, but as a teacher speaks to a student. "You were wrong," he said, "but what matters is that you realized it. Mistakes aren't what destroy us, it's refusing to face them that does." Emily nodded through her tears. "I'll learn. I promise I will." He smiled faintly. "Good. Start by listening and seeing others with your heart, not with your assumptions." The atmosphere in the lobby shifted. The tension slowly melted into a reflective calm, the quiet of awakening. Several young employees exchanged glances, their eyes showing that they knew they had witnessed something historic. A few customers approached Jordan, shaking his hand, whispering, "Thank you for showing us what's right." He responded to each one with humility. He didn't need applause. He only needed understanding. As he approached the counter, he bent down and picked up a small, torn scrap of paper, one of the last remnants of the destroyed check. The paper was soft, thin, its edges jagged. He turned it gently between his fingers and gave a wistful smile. "This," he said softly, "is just paper. But what it stands for, the trust between human beings, is what truly matters." He placed the scrap on the counter beside Emily's phone and said, "Don't forget this moment. Because from here, we rebuild not just the bank, but the way we see one another." As Jordan walked toward the VIP elevator, people instinctively stepped aside. No one told them to, but every phone slowly lowered for the first time since this all began. No one was recording anymore. They didn't need to. They had already understood. The elevator doors opened, casting warm, golden light across his face. Calm, thoughtful, profoundly human. He turned back to the crowd one last time, his voice steady and kind, like the first wind of a new season. "We will all make mistakes, every one of us. But how we face those mistakes will define who we are." Then he stepped inside. The doors slid shut, reflecting his final image, the man in the black hoodie who used respect to teach an entire world the meaning of true power. The boardroom sat on the highest floor of Monarch Capital Bank, where the afternoon light poured through massive panes of glass and stretched across the polished oak floor. From here, Jordan Ellis could see the entire Chicago skyline towers layered against one another, catching the gold of the setting sun. Everything below looked small and far away, the way people so often forget the true value of what seems small. He took the chair at the head of the table. In front of him were 12 more chairs, all empty. The executive team was still downstairs, waiting for his permission to begin. Jordan didn't hurry. He looked at his hands, still dusted with fine white flecks from the shredded check, a thin ash-like film he could not ignore. One wrong decision and trust can turn to ash. The thought rang cold and obvious. The door opened. Linda Park, Thomas Green, and Karen Patel stepped in. They had witnessed everything in the lobby, and their eyes, respectful as ever, now carried a weight that was hard to name. Chairman Ellis Linda said, gentle but firm, "On behalf of the entire executive team, we want to apologize for what happened. None of us imagined a branch culture could drift so far from the philosophy you built. Jordan lifted his gaze, kind but steady. This is not one person's fault. A system only weakens when the person leading it stops believing he can be wrong. Silence settled. Wind threaded faintly along the glass. Thomas exhaled. We have invested millions of dollars in customer service training. Maybe what needs teaching is not procedure, but humanity. Jordan gave a small, sad, sincere smile. You are right. We can write procedures. Compassion must be learned by the heart. On the large screen at the far end, a live social feed played the very video Emily had streamed. Viewers were still climbing. The headline crawled across the screen, "Bank Chairman Undercover has his check destroyed by his own staff, then turns the tables." Karen clicked her tongue, worry in her voice. This will go global. The stock may swing. The press will swarm. Jordan didn't flinch. Leaning back, he spoke slowly. Sometimes a media shock is the medicine we need. I do not fear the truth, Karen. I fear our silence in the face of it. Linda studied him, admiration bright in her eyes. How do you want to proceed, Chairman? Jordan folded his arms and looked out the window. Far below the lobby still swelled with people from up here. The scattered heads moved like a restless current, where prejudice, trust, and honor collide every day. We will not deny and we will not deflect, he said. Tomorrow I want a press conference. We will acknowledge the failure openly, and we will launch the Human First Initiative, a comprehensive program on dignity and respect in service. Thomas blinked. You are turning a scandal into a cultural reset. Jordan nodded. Not just a strategy, a public apology. A bank can afford to lose money. It cannot afford to lose its soul. Downstairs, Emily Carter sat alone on a lobby bench. She had just hung up with Human Resources, who told her she would begin retraining next week. When she set the phone down, her hands were still shaking. On the floor, a few scraps remained from the ruined check. She picked up a tiny piece and held it in her palm. Only a fragment of numbers showed 7,000.00. She stared at it for a long moment and whispered, "If only I had looked closer, listened harder." At the next counter, a young colleague about 23 glanced over. "I watched the whole thing," he said softly. "You were brave, Emily. Not everyone faces their mistakes like that." She looked up with a thin smile. "Brave, maybe, but I mostly feel ashamed. Maybe shame is the first step to relearning how to be human." He fell quiet. Together they looked toward the doors where the sunset washed the sign that read Monarch Capital Bank in orange and gold. In that light, the Crown logo seemed to burn beautiful and painful at once. Upstairs, Jordan remained seated, writing a few lines on a white page. It was not minutes, and it was not a plan. It was a letter. He wrote slowly, every stroke deliberate. To all employees today, I witnessed something that hurts more than any loss on a ledger, the moment we forgot that respect is the foundation of every transaction. I do not want to assign blame. I want to learn again with you. Learn to listen. Learn to see the person behind a suit or a hoodie. Because a bank does not only safeguard money, it must safeguard trust. He set down the pen and drew a long breath. At the door, Linda spoke softly. "Chairman, people are waiting downstairs. They want to hear something from you." Jordan nodded, folded the letter, and stood. The last light of day edged his temple with gold, a halo on someone who had walked through a storm and remained standing. When the elevator opened, the buzz below faded to a hush. People stepped aside again. Without being told, eyes lifted toward the man in the black hoodie. This time there was no suspicion and no curiosity. There was real respect, the kind no rule book can enforce, the kind one moment can teach forever. Jordan took the small dais at the center of the lobby, facing hundreds in the room and thousands watching online. He lifted the letter and read his voice, low and resonant, each word landing squarely in the heart. We were wrong, not one person, but the collective. Mistakes are frightening only when we deny them. Today we will not pass blame. We will accept responsibility. And starting tomorrow, we begin again, with respect as our compass. The lobby went still. Then applause rose, not loud, but steady, sincere, spreading like a tide. Jordan looked around and felt the current lift a flame, catching. He knew this moment would live not only in headlines, but in the shared memory of thousands, a lesson in power that bows to dignity. He smiled faintly, the chandelier lights scattered like small stars in his eyes, and among them a single thought passed. Perhaps true power is not in making people bow their heads, but in helping them lift them and see one another's worth. That night, the city of Chicago seemed brighter than usual. But it wasn't the street lights or the glow of its towers. It was the hundreds of thousands of phone screens illuminated by the same video bank chairman has his check destroyed by his own employee, a lesson that silenced the world. The video had surpassed 10 million views in just a few hours. Every social platform overflowed with the same clip the moment Jordan Ellis stood in his black hoodie in the marble lobby, speaking every word clearly. Respect should never depend on clothing or titles. It is the minimum value of being human. News outlets broke the story. Television networks launched analysis segments. A major business channel ran the headline, "The man who made the financial world look in the mirror." In a small apartment in the north side of the city, Emily Carter sat alone, the light from her phone screen reflecting off her makeup-free face. She replayed her own video every second, every angle, every line she had accidentally captured. When it reached the moment, Brad shouted, "That man can't have $4.7 million." Emily shuddered. She remembered how she had felt a rush back then, excited, powerful, thrilled to see a suspicious man get put in his place. Now every second of that memory stung like shame pressed against her heart. She turned off the video and buried her face in her hands. Outside, rain began to fall, its soft rhythm blending with her quiet sobs. On her desk, the notice from Human Resources lay open. Employee Emily Carter is required to attend the Human First Initiative training, starting at 8 o'clock Monday morning. She looked at it and nodded softly. "I'll go," she whispered, "and I'll learn how to be human again." Meanwhile, Brad Harlan sat in his car parked a few blocks from the bank. He hadn't driven anywhere. He just sat there staring at his phone. News articles with the headline, "Branch Director Fired After Insulting the Chairman," filled every feed. He scrolled through the comments, thousands of people condemning, mocking, and attacking him. But one comment made him stop reading. Yes, Mr. Harlan was wrong. But I pity him because he never realized he was only repeating what the system taught him, to judge people by appearance. Brad exhaled deeply. For the first time in years, he felt utterly empty. No status, no power, no admiration. Only a haunting question. Had I become the very kind of man I once despised? He gripped the steering wheel, his eyes rising toward the building in the distance. The Monarch Capital Bank logo still glowed bright against the night sky. That had once been his stage. Now it stood as a monument to his downfall. What he didn't know was that high above Jordan Ellis was still awake, standing by the window looking down at the city. There was no anger in him. None at all. Only a quiet wish that the man below in his solitude might come to understand that being judged is never as cruel as losing one's own humanity. The next morning, Monarch Capital Bank became the center of global attention. But what surprised everyone was not the scandal itself, it was how the bank responded. Instead of avoiding the media, Jordan opened the doors to every journalist and held a press conference right in the very lobby where everything had happened. When he walked out, he was no longer wearing the black hoodie, but his look remained simple. A white shirt with the sleeves rolled up a loosely knotted tie. Behind him stood hundreds of employees lined up, straight among them Emily. Her eyes filled with resolve. "We are not here to justify Jordan," began his voice, steady over the microphone. "We are here to take responsibility. What happened yesterday was not just the fault of one person, but of an entire system, a system that allowed prejudice to seep into the one place where neutrality should have lived the human heart." The reporters burst with questions. One asked, "Aren't you afraid this will damage your reputation?" Mr. Ellis Jordan smiled. "A brand can survive a media storm. It cannot survive silence in the face of wrong. Reputation isn't built through public relations. It's built through truth in action." He paused for a beat before continuing. "Today I am announcing the Human First Initiative. All 11,000 employees of Monarch Capital Bank, from security guards and tellers to vice presidents, will undergo mandatory training in respect, empathy, and personal responsibility. We will partner with social organizations, universities, and ethics experts to rebuild a culture of service." A young reporter raised her hand. "What do you hope will come from this?" Jordan looked directly into the camera, his voice calm but unwavering. "I hope that one day, when an ordinary person walks into our bank, no matter how they dress or speak, they will be treated with one thing, and one thing only, dignity." The room fell silent. Then applause broke out, strong and continuous, spreading through the lobby like a wave. 3 days later, the same newspapers that had run sensational headlines now shifted their tone. Forbes published Monarch Capital Bank from scandal to a model of human-centered reform. CNN Business aired the headline, "The Ellis Effect, when compassion becomes a business strategy." Within a week, companies across industries reached out to Monarch, seeking to learn from the human-first training model. Social media reversed its tone clips from Jordan's speech, spread with hashtags "Lead with Respect Human First" and "Monarch Rising." In his office, Jordan sat reading emails from all over the world, messages from strangers sharing their stories of discrimination, of being dismissed, and how his video made them feel seen. He read every one of them, not skipping a single line. One final message made him stop. The sender was Brad Harlan. "I don't ask for forgiveness, but I want to thank you for not destroying me the way I destroyed you. I'm now part of a community service program as required, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something right." Jordan smiled, his expression softening. He typed one simple line in reply. "That's why I didn't cancel the second check." He pressed send, then leaned back, looking through the wide window. The city outside still buzzed, chaotic, noisy, full of a prejudice, but inside him, something had quieted. In that evening light, the sun reflected against the new sign outside the bank. The freshly changed words read, "Monarch Capital Bank, Human First," and beneath it, engraved in brass, "Respect isn't earned by money. It's given by choice." Jordan looked at the line, a faint smile crossing his lips. He knew the flame had been lit not in the media, but in people. And this time it would spread quietly and steadily, heart to heart, one soul at a time. 3 months later, the Human First initiative had officially rolled out across every branch of Monarch Capital Bank in the United States. And to everyone's surprise, instead of resistance or indifference, thousands of employees volunteered to join early. No one saw it as a mandatory training anymore, but as a chance to rediscover the meaning in their work, something they thought they already understood. On the first morning of the program, the main auditorium at headquarters glowed with natural light. A large banner stretched across the stage, Human First Relearning Humanity in the Age of Finance. Jordan Ellis entered to the sound of calm applause. He didn't stand on the stage, but chose to sit among the first row with his employees. He didn't talk about revenue or dividends, but shared simple stories, customers who were turned away because they stuttered a janitor, once suspected by security for carrying a plastic bag, an elderly woman ignored because her deposit was too small. His voice wasn't dramatic, but it was sincere, reaching the deepest corners of the human heart. "We work with money every day," he said, "but maybe because of that, we've forgotten something far more valuable: trust. When a customer places their money in our hands, they are not only trusting us with their wealth, but also with the belief that we will treat them with respect. And when that trust is broken, no amount of profit can ever repair it." No one spoke. A few employees nodded quietly, some took notes. In that stillness, Jordan felt a new current rising, not of fear, but of awakening. In the back row, Emily Carter sat silently, her fingers interlaced. She had completed 3 weeks of the program, and every day she wrote in a journal. The pages were filled with slanted handwriting recording how she was learning to listen, to apologize, and to be grateful. Today she carried a small envelope. Inside was the tiny scrap of the destroyed check, the only thing she had kept from that fateful day. To her now, it was no longer evidence of a mistake, but a symbol of a new beginning. When the session ended, Emily nervously approached Jordan. He was speaking with a few senior staff members, but when he saw her, he turned immediately, his familiar gentle smile lighting his face. "Hello, Emily," he said, his tone soft, with no trace of hierarchy. "How are you doing?" She nodded, then held out the envelope. "I wanted to return this. I think it belongs to you." Jordan took it and opened it. Inside was the faded scrap of paper, the ink nearly gone, leaving only the number 00. But he understood instantly. He brushed its edge with his thumb and looked at her. "Thank you," he said, quietly. "But actually it doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to all of us, the ones who learned something from it." She smiled, her eyes shimmering. "I still feel guilty, you know. But now I understand. Guilt isn't meant to be avoided. It's meant to remind us what we need to do differently." Jordan nodded. "Exactly. Guilt only has value when it turns into change." 2 weeks later, Jordan was invited to speak at the National Conference on Business Ethics, attended by hundreds of executive scholars and journalists. On stage, among rows of tailored suits, stood Jordan in his usual style, a white shirt, a simple grey blazer, no tie. "It's ironic," he began, his voice calm, "that a bank had to relearn how to be human." The audience chuckled lightly. Then he continued, his tone deepening. "Today we invest millions in verification systems, in cybersecurity, in risk management, but we forget to invest in the one thing that can save any system: human dignity." A banker can be trained to detect a fake check, but no one teaches them how to recognize a genuine heart. And when that happens, the entire financial system becomes hollow, like a strong body that has lost its soul. The room went completely silent. The air grew dense, not with discomfort, but with the truth everyone knew, yet rarely spoke aloud. He closed with a sentence that brought the audience to their feet in applause. True wealth isn't locked in a vault. It's in how we make others feel valued. Jordan's story spread across America, then beyond its borders. Dozens of corporations invited him as an honorary advisor. Universities began using the Monarch incident as a required case study in leadership ethics courses. But Jordan never saw himself as a hero. When reporters asked if he felt proud, he only replied, "No. I feel grateful that I got to see people prove that goodness still exists, as long as someone reminds them to remember it." One late afternoon, after another, human first class ended, Jordan left the office and walked through the city streets. He stopped in front of a small cafe where a wooden sign hung on the door, "Everyone deserves to be welcomed." He smiled and stepped inside. The barista, a young college student, greeted him with a warm smile. "Good evening, sir. What can I get you?" Jordan looked at him, his eyes kind. "An espresso, please." "And tell me, why did you choose that slogan?" The young man grinned. "Because I saw your video, Mr. Ellis, and I thought if a bank can learn to respect people again, then a little coffee shop like mine can too." Jordan froze for a moment, then smiled softly. "Thank you," he said. "You just reminded me that every big change begins in small places like this." That night when he returned home, Jordan stood on his balcony overlooking the city. The buildings sparkled, the streams of traffic intertwined like veins that never slept. He thought of his mother who once told him, "You'll never lose anything if you hold on to kindness." He whispered the words under his breath, smiling. In the darkness, the lights from the Monarch building reflected against the night sky, the crown symbol shining bright. But this time, Jordan knew that light was more than a logo. It was the glow of a belief reborn. 1 year later, the story of Monarch Capital Bank had become a legend in the world of finance. No one spoke of it as a scandal anymore. It was remembered as a moral rebirth. Major corporations began replicating the human-first model, treating it as the new foundation of corporate culture. At business forums, people mentioned the name Jordan Ellis not as a powerful CEO, but as a man who had guided an entire era toward respect. At the Chicago headquarters where everything began, the atmosphere had completely changed. The counters were lowered to create a sense of closeness. A new sign hung on the wall that read, "No one is too small to deserve respect, and no one is too great to forget humility." Emily Carter was now the head of customer service, responsible for training new employees. She no longer wore red lipstick, her hair was neatly tied back, and the arrogance once reflected in her eyes was gone. Whenever new trainees arrived, she would share her story. "I used to think professionalism meant controlling others. Now I know it means understanding and listening to them." Behind her hung a framed photograph, Jordan standing in his black hoodie in the middle of the lobby, calm-eyed amid the chaos. Below the photo, a brass plaque read, "Respect is not what you earn. It's what you give." Brad Harlan, after months of working in community service, had become a volunteer counselor for a rehabilitation program, helping those who had lost their jobs regain their dignity. He no longer wore suits, just a grey sweater and reading glasses, his voice now low and sincere. In every talk he gave, he often said, "The day I lost my job, I thought my world had ended." But really, it was just beginning to rebuild from within me. As for Jordan Ellis, a year later he appeared less in the media. He worked quietly, spent more time with his family, and wrote a book titled The Currency of Dignity. The book quickly became part of business ethics courses in universities. When a journalist asked him, "What do you think is the greatest legacy you've left behind?" Jordan smiled, his gaze drifting toward the Chicago skyline, where the sunset painted the glass towers in gold. "It's not the bank," he said, "and it's not the reforms. It's the belief that even in a world driven by money, people can still choose kindness." Outside, the monarch sign glowed brightly in the fading light reflecting across the sky like a gentle reminder. No matter who you are, begin everything with respect. On a late winter afternoon, snow fell thick over Michigan Avenue. From the tall glass window of his office, Jordan Ellis quietly watched the hurried crowds below. White snowflakes landed on the shoulders of strangers, making no distinction between rich or poor, just like the lesson he had spent his life trying to remind the world of respect has no class. On his desk lay hundreds of handwritten letters from employees and customers. One was from a security guard, who wrote that, thanks to the Human First program, he had learned to greet people with a smile instead of suspicion. Another was from a young girl who said her father, once treated unfairly at a bank, now believed in people again. Jordan read every word, his eyes glistening. Beside him sat the old framed photograph, him in a black hoodie, standing in the marble lobby, calm gaze, steady, holding a fragment of shredded paper. The photo needed no caption, because the world already knew that story. He spoke softly to himself. If there is anything I wish to leave behind, it isn't a bank, but a culture of humanity. Outside, the streetlights came on their glow, reflecting off the Monarch Capital Bank sign, "Human First, respect before profit." Jordan smiled and closed his eyes gently. He knew that true legacy doesn't live inside a vault, but in hearts that learn to see one another. And in the winter of the world, there are still people learning how to keep it warm with two simple words: respect and compassion. From the perspective of an expert in leadership ethics and corporate culture, the journey of Jordan Ellis is not merely a story of power and reconstruction, but a living testament that in today's fiercely competitive world, humanity is the most enduring asset. When a leader dares to confront the failures within his own system, he doesn't just save an organization, he restores the trust that society has lost. His story reminds us that respect is not something to be granted, but something to be lived, protected, and shared every single day, through even the smallest actions. If you believe that respect can change the way people treat one another, please like this video. To spread that message, subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss the journeys where dignity shines through the darkness, and comment below with the phrase that reflects your belief: keep respect.